Hi everyone, welcome back to Life Literature. Today, I'm going to take up the poem To the Nile by John Keats. First, we'll have a little bit of a look at John Keats. John Keats had been one of the greatest of romantic poets, falling in line with William Wordsworth, Percival Shelley, Leigh Hunt, and so many others. And he represents the second generation of romantic poets. And the story behind this poem is also equally interesting because this poem was written as a result of a friendly sonnet competition among three poets, John Keats himself, Percival Shelley, and Leigh Hunt. Because they were bored at one of their holiday locations, they thought of having a competition, a sonnet competition, on the theme of the River Nile. So just imagine John Keats' this poem To the Nile was written within only 15 minutes. It's really amazing. So we are now going to study what he has got to say about the longest river in the world, the River Nile, in a sonnetic structure. Let's get started. Here in this video clip, you will see the geographical background to the River Nile, the historical background to the River Nile, and how it has become a marvel of nature. Let's first watch it.
The longest river in the world, the River Nile, is in Africa. It originates in Burundi, south of the equator, and flows northward, covering 10 countries, eventually flowing through Egypt and finally draining into the Mediterranean Sea. Can you just imagine it is 6,695 kilometers in length? Challenge: find through what other countries it flows except Egypt. The source of the Nile is an often disputed fact. The Ruwenzori mountain range bordering Uganda and Congo, which are thought to be the mountains of the moon by the natives due to their snow-capped whiteness and shape, is believed to be the source of Nile at first. Some believe it is fed by the Lake Victoria. Now it is thought that it is fed by 2 large lakes and 2 mighty rivers, so the mystery still lingers on. The Nile has been an important source of life for people throughout history. Around 5,000 years ago, the ancient Egyptians relied on the Nile for fresh water, food, and transportation. It also provided them with fertile land to farm on. But how did the Nile allow farming on dry desert land? The river flooded every August, and all the nutrient-rich soil carried in the flood water spread across the river banks, leaving it perfect for growing crops. And it is not just important for humans. The river and its banks are home to lots of wonderful wildlife too, including different kinds of fish, birds, turtles, snakes, hippos, and one of our planet's largest reptiles, the Nile crocodile. Amazing, isn't it? Such an incredible river is cause for celebration and veneration for sure. Egyptians have ever believed that the Nile is a god, as the Nile has been a significant natural event which allowed their civilization to grow. They worship the river as god Hapi for fertilizing a desert. In addition, the Nile provided ancient Egyptians with a vital transportation route. In creation of the monumental tombs as the Great Pyramid of Giza, the massive blocks of limestones were transported along the Nile. So, what do you think? Is the Nile just a marvel of nature, or should it be venerated?
We'll start the study of River Nile by digging deep into the lines of John Keats. Before we get started, I'll give you a little bit of information about what this sonnet form is. Here, of course, we come across the Petrarchan sonnet. John Keats has followed the tradition of writing Petrarchan sonnet here. In a Petrarchan sonnet, we have got two major sections, two major parts. The first one is octave, the second one is the sestet. In the octave, we have got two quatrains. The function of these quatrains differs slightly. In the first quatrain, an argument or an idea is forwarded, presented, and in the second quatrain, this same idea or the argument is developed further. So looking at the poem in this slide, we'll see what John Keats is trying to do within the octave in his first quatrain and the second quatrain. The first quatrain goes like this. In the first line, the poet says, "Son of the old moon mountains African." There you get the poetic device called inversion because he uses the sentence pattern in the other way round, not in the ordinary SVO pattern, subject, verb, object pattern. He had slightly deviated from that normal pattern. That is called inversion. So normally it goes like this, "Son of the African old moon mountains." So there, the poet has personified the river Nile, addressing him as the sun. The capital letters S-O-N shows the intensity of this calling, intensity of this addressing. He seems to be having a direct conversation with the river Nile. So whose son is river Nile? It seems the river Nile is the son of the old moon mountains in Africa. What are these moon mountains? Moon mountains are thought of the mountains, a mountain range called the Ruwenzori mountain range. So this is in connection, this idea is in connection to the source of river Nile. The source of river Nile, I told you, we learned in the video also, the source of river Nile has always been a controversial problem. Maybe because of its length and maybe because of the difficulty in finding this information during the ancient times. It seems that John Keats had studied the information of the European travelers, and he had also got the idea that the river Nile starts from this Ruwenzori mountain range, as the Egyptians, the ancient Egyptians believed. So, these Ruwenzori mountains were called as the moon mountains by the ancient Egyptians. Why? Maybe because of their shape. They are of the semicircular shape. And also, in most of the time of the year, these mountain tops were covered with snow. So they have got snow-capped mountains, which gives these mountains a fair white color. So maybe because of this fair white color and the semicircular shape, they are compared to moon, the shape of the moon and the color of the moon. So therefore, we see that these moon mountains means these mountains are metaphorically compared to moon. Moon, we know, is a celestial object. It is a celestial object. So, if the river Nile is the son of the moon-shaped mountains, almost a celestial object, the river also becomes a celestial object. So therefore, we can say, we can imagine that the poet has the idea that the river is more like a god as a celestial object. It is there in heaven. It starts from heaven. That doubt, that curiosity the ancient Egyptians had about the beginning of the river Nile is seen here through this image of the river Nile as the son of the old moon mountains. So that's fascinating. So in John Keats' idea, the river Nile is just like a god, is just like a divine object. Therefore, the river Nile is deified, made divine, made godlike. So this is associated with the Greek mythology on which John Keats is very much interested in. I think, when you consider his other works also, you will see that how much he had been interested in Greek mythology. So that idea is there. The idea of gods are there in the very first line of the poem to the Nile. So that's how it works, the first line. And also, I have to add a little bit to that. In the very first line, not only the river is personified, not only the river is deified, also the river is given, or the river is attributed a masculine strength, just like a male, because the river is the sun, a masculine strength is attributed to the river Nile as well. And at the same time, the line ends with a particular punctuation mark. Yes, did you note that? That particular punctuation mark is the interjection. That interjection actually shows very strong feelings, strong emotions. What do you think is the strong emotion that Keats has towards the river Nile? Yes, I think you have correctly guessed. Maybe surprise, no? Maybe marvel, maybe his fascination towards this beautiful and wonderful river, which has turned out to be the longest river in the world. So we'll move on to the second line. In the second line, once again, the poet addresses the river. This time, he calls the river as chief of the pyramids and crocodiles. So there also you get some other fascinating information about the river Nile. This time, he calls the river as the chief. Now, when you come across that word chief, you see that it is very much associated with these African tribal communities. We know that their leaders, the leaders of the tribal communities, are often being addressed as chief. So this word chief reminds us of the African culture, African history, African life. So this time, the river Nile has turned out to be the chief.
The two words pyramid and crocodile are used as symbols by the poet here. Capital P and capital C in these two words indicate that they are symbols. Pyramid symbolizes the dead and the crocodile symbolizes the living. You know that the river Nile had helped the ancient Egyptians to transport the huge granite blocks to build up these pyramids. And also you know that the huge giant crocodiles of the river Nile are actually a wonder of nature. So therefore, the poet here indicates those two things and calls the river Nile as the chief of both the living and the dead, the animate and the inanimate. And in the same manner as in the first line, it ends with the exclamation mark, reminding us of an interjection, a strong feeling.
Now let's move on to the third and the fourth lines of the first quatrain. These two lines we'll have to treat together in order to get the meaning easily. So they are like this. We call thee fruitful, and that very while a desert fills our sings in words span. So here in the third line, the poet expresses his own feeling towards the river Nile. He says, we call you fruitful. Thee here means you in the objective position. So thee is a word borrowed from the Old English, from archaic language. So here the poet says, you are fruitful. That's how we call you. That's true, isn't that so? Because the river Nile had been useful for the ancient Egyptian people, and actually the first civilization in the world has started in that area in the Nile Valley. Actually, the Nile Valley is called as the cradle of one of the oldest civilizations in the world. So it truly is fruitful. That's what the poet says. We call thee fruitful. And then he uses a comma, a special punctuation mark there. So this comma is seen as a caesura by the critics. A caesura is a significant pause at some place of a line. If a poet wants to make the reader stop for a while, if a poet himself wants to stop for a while and think a little bit, this punctuation mark, the comma, is used as a caesura. So this caesura makes the reader stop. The caesura has stopped the poet himself. And then, after thinking a little bit, he gives another idea. That is, he says, at that very while. That means, at that same moment. Which same moment? The moment he thought that the river Nile is fruitful. At that same moment, the picture he got into his imagination, the picture he got into his mind had been a desert. So that had given him a doubt. Whenever we hear the word the river Nile, whenever we see the picture of the river Nile, the picture that comes to the frame of our mind is a desert. That's true even with us also, no? Because Egypt, when we hear the word Egypt, we imagine of a desert. When we think of pyramids, we imagine of a desert, no? So that is quite fair because we know that in the whole land area of Egypt, only 7.7% is being used by human beings. So this is the situation in the African continent. In the African continent is, of course, it is only 1/3. The usable land area is only 1/3. So that means the majority of this continent is being left as a desert. So the poet has got a doubt. How come the African continent, or rather Egypt, has been left as a desert if the river Nile is that much useful, if it is that much fruitful? This is the doubt that he had got into his mind. This is the doubt which had created his imagination. So the caesura is the turning point of this first quatrain where the argument is forwarded. And this periphrasis means the use of a number of words to convey a single meaning, that is sings, are sings. Inward span means imagination, our imagination. So the periphrasis also confirms that. Okay, so that's how the argument is built up in the very first quatrain. Now, if we now move on to the second quatrain, you know what happens there, no? Because in the second quatrain, the argument built up or forwarded in the first quatrain is being further developed. So now let's see how this argument, that means the doubt the poet has got about river Nile, how it is further developed. The second quatrain goes like this. Nurse of swart nations, since the world began, art thou so fruitful, or dost thou beguile such men to honor thee between Cairo and Deccan? So that's how the second quatrain goes. So the poet says, once again, the poet addresses the river Nile, this time with another different image. Earlier, this addressing had been masculine, son of old moon mountains, chief of pyramids and crocodiles. This time, he calls the river Nile as nurse, nurse of swart nations. Swart nations means black-skinned people. We know in the African continent, the complexion of the people out there is rather black. So here the poet is referring to these Africans with black skins. So for these people, the river Nile had been the nurse since the beginning of the world. What do you mean by nurse? Nurse is the person who takes care of the others. The person who takes care of the others is a nurse. So with the image of a nurse, it is very much feminine, isn't it? So of course there are males also who are capable of this caring and sharing of others. But of course the traditional image, the common image that we get with the word is associated with a feminine image. So therefore we can say that this time the river Nile is given a feminine touch. Like a strong man, you had been or rather you are taking care of the African people as the son of a divine God, enabling blessings for everybody, and as the chief or the king of the whole area, you are taking care of the swart nations. And this time, as a woman, as a lady, maybe as a mother, the river Nile is taking care of these African people. So that is the addressing we have in the first line of the second quatrain. Then, after addressing the river Nile for the third time, he once again gets connected with the earlier argument. He directs actually two questions here. The first question is a short one and the second question is rather a long one. In the first question, he asks, "Art thou so fruitful?" In archaic language, art thou means are you? Are you so fruitful? Are you so useful? In the first quatrain, he said, river Nile is useful. And now he questions himself maybe. Now he is expressing his doubt now. Are you so fruitful? That is his first question. The second question is long, I told you. We'll see what it is. In the second question, he says, "O dost thou?" That means, "O do you?" Or do you beguile? Beguile means, do you charm? Do you make them have blind faith in you? Do you charm? Do you make them have blind faith in you? Do you beguile such men? Such men means who are being referred to as such men. Because in the earlier line, the poet was talking about the swart nations, black Africans. No? So here, such men refers to those swart nations or black Africans. So here the poet asks, do you beguile such men? Do you charm or do you trick such men to honor thee? To honor thee means to honor you. So that's quite a heavy question that he is asking from the river Nile, isn't it? So it's a heavy question. It's a question which directs or which promotes criticism on river Nile. First question, are you so fruitful? Are you so useful? Second question, or do you trick the black Africans to honor you? And further he describes these black Africans. He further describes these swart nation, the African people. He says these men who are worn with toil, these men who are worn with toil, rest for a space twixt Cairo and Deccan. Twixt means between. Twixt in archaic language is between. So the question asked is, these African people, they are worn with toil. What is toil? Toil is hard work. They are worn out. Worn out means so tired. They are so tired with hard work. Is it a fact? Yes, because in the African continent, in Egypt and all, because most of the land area is a desert, they have very little facilities. No? They have very less facilities in their lives. So they have to work hard. They have to struggle for living. So these people are worn with toil. They are so fed up. They are so tired with hard work. And the poet questions, do they have a rest? Do they ever rest between Cairo and Deccan? So this is quite an interesting phrase, between Cairo and Deccan. So we'll have to analyze this phrase. What is Cairo? If you have watched that earlier video, you might have noticed that Cairo is the place where the river Nile falls into the Mediterranean Sea. That means Cairo is the last landscape that the river Nile meets before it falls into the sea, before it joins the sea. Cairo is the last place, right? That means Cairo is on land. Okay, then what is this Deccan? Deccan actually is a constellation. It is a constellation. It is a pattern of a cluster of stars. It is a certain pattern of a cluster of stars. Actually, in this cluster, there are 36 stars, it says. Okay, so Deccan is a constellation. That means Deccan is there in the sky, or rather, in literature, we can call it the heaven. Deccan is in heaven, whereas Cairo is on earth because it's a land area. So, between the land area and heaven, between the earth and heaven, how can you organize these two places between earth and heaven? You can interpret this with the lives of the salt nations. If you interpret these two things, land and heaven, in connection to a life of a person, we can say land represents birth because we are born into this earth. No? So land is birth. So if land is birth, sky or the heaven is what? It is death. So that means the question is, the poets worry about whether these dark-skinned people, do they have a rest between their birth and their death? That means through their entire lifespan, they have been working, they have been struggling with this land, they have been engaged in a strong fight for their lives to go on living, because African continent is a very hard continent, a rough continent, where the land provides meager comforts for the human beings there. So that's why the poet says, these people, these dark-skinned peoples are worn with toil. They are so fed up with this hard work. It's because of their hard work that they had succeeded in this civilization. It's because of their strong struggle that they had been able to build up pyramids. It's because of their endurance. It's because of their capacity. It's because of their talents that they had cultivated this land of the desert. So it's the talent or it's the hard work of these dark-skinned people. So what is that argument? So in the first quatrain, he got a doubt. Are you so fruitful? right? Then in the second quatrain, he tells us, yes, my imagining of a desert is somewhat correct. Why? Because it is the skill of these dark-skinned people. Because of the skill of these dark-skinned people, Egypt has got fertile. It is not only the miracle of the river Nile, or maybe the river Nile had supported the Egyptians. That's how it goes, the second quatrain. Therefore, in the octave of this sonnet, the poet imparts with the argument that the river Nile is actually worshipable because the Egyptians worshipped the river Nile, thinking that river Nile is godlike, river Nile is divine, river Nile is royal, and river Nile is the caretaker of the whole nation. So that's the argument that he imparts with. And also, along with that argument, the poet presents his doubt also. His doubt is very much visible in these two words which are being juxtaposed. The word fruitful and the desert. These two words are juxtaposed because fruitful suggests the fertility of the land and desert suggests the barrenness of the land. So it is quite interesting to note this paradoxical or juxtaposed image of the river Nile. It can be at the same time fruitful and at the same time it can be barren. Right? So this is the argument that he has built up within the quatrain. And now let's move on to the sestet of the sonnet. Sestet means the final 6 lines of the sonnet. So there is an important fact about this sestet. The very first line of the sestet is being called as volta. There's a special function for this volta. Always the volta changes the argument. It gives a twist to the argument. That is the function of the volta. Let's see whether John Keats also changed the argument so far built. What is the change? Do we notice a change here? The volta goes like this. Oh, may dark fancies err, they surely do. Err means mistakes. O, the single O, shows his feeling. Now this is almost like a wish. May dark fancies err. Dark fancies means dark imaginations. What do you think are these dark imaginations which are in connection to the river Nile? Maybe the mystery of the river Nile, mystery of how it starts, where it starts, and the mystery associated with this mythology and the uncertainties. Is it really useful or is it not? If it is useful, how come Africa be a desert? No? And the doubts and uncertainties. So this God-like element, actually, I forgot to tell you at the beginning, these Egyptians treat the river Nile as a god. They call the river Nile as God Hapi. So that venerated feeling about the river Nile. So all these are, when taken together, are the dark fancies. So he has a wish here in the volta. He says all these dark fancies are mistaken. We have been mistaken in believing all these dark fancies. So that means he rejects the idea of the river Nile, treatment of the river Nile as divine. He rejects the treatment of river Nile as something very special, unique. He rejects it. So that is what he does in the volta or the very first line of the sestet. Then can you consider it as a change? Is it a twist? Yes, it is so. Here the argument is twisted. he shifts from the romantic imagination of the River Nile to a more aesthetic sense. He's trying to focus more about the aesthetic value or the beauty of the River Nile in the next 5 lines. So the shift is from the reverence to realism, right? From romantic, exotic imagination to aesthetic imagination. So that is the change that occurs. So he goes on to prove his changed argument now. Because he had changed his mind, he has changed his idea as if he has waken up from a deep reverie. Right? So now he's going to prove himself in earnest. Let's see how the poet is going to prove that River Nile is just not a mythical something. It is not just a god. It has its beauty also. It has its utility also, which is very much close to nature as a nature's marvel, not as a marvel of mythology, not as a marvel of these legendary stories of Egypt. It is just a part and parcel of nature. That's what he is going to prove in the sestet. Let's see how he is going to do that. Here, the poet is talking about the ignorance of the European people, because they believe they are in the obsession that the entire African continent is a desert. Maybe he is talking about that ignorance of the Europeans. And at the same time, he may be referring to the ignorance of the traditional Egyptian people who blindly believe or blindly worship the River Nile, thinking that River Nile is a god. So he may be pointing out both these layers, the ignorance of the Europeans and at the same time the ignorance of the Africans. Maybe he's saying that both extremes are wrong. You can't totally condemn Africa as a desert, and also you can't totally glorify River Nile as a god. Both extremes are wrong, he says, because he likes to highlight the natural value of the River Nile, how nature has been a blessing for the African continent to become fertile. He's he's trying to glorify nature and venerate nature, because it is not the aspect of mythology which had fertilized Africa. And also you can't condemn Africa saying that it doesn't have all these glories. So that is what the poet is trying to tell us in this. So he says, "Oh, may dark fancies err they surely do." He's fully confirmed about it. These are really dark fancies. You have to let them go by. You should not stick to them. They surely do. He confirms that. And he says it is because of the ignorance of the Europeans maybe, ignorance of the Africans maybe. Because of their ignorance, they think like that. You have to look at the natural side of the river. What is the natural side of the river? Thou dost bedew green rushes like our rivers, and dost taste the pleasant sunrise. Green eyes hast thou too, and to the sea as happily dost haste. So these are the natural elements of the river. Here, the typical Keatsian language is very much prominent in these 5 lines. John Keats is being really recognized by the poetry lovers, because of his sensual language, the language that comes alive in the senses, especially by describing the beauties of nature, the sounds of nature, the smells of nature, and tastes of nature. He uses quite a sensual language in talking about nature. So he applies the same kind of language here, the typical Keatsian language he applies here. So he talks about the beauty of the river Nile. He creates a very beautiful visual image here. He says, "Thou dost bedew green rushes like our rivers." You do bedew. Bedew means you apply dews on green rushes. You, the river Nile, you apply dews on green rushes. Green rushes means green plants with long leaves. So by the mornings, we can see the green plants with long leaves decorated or covered with drops of mist. So that's a beautiful visual he is producing there. And then he goes on to a gustatory image. He talks about the taste of sunrise. Have you ever felt the taste of sunrise? Especially at the morning hours, the sunrise is actually, the sunlight is very tasty. You feel comfortable under that smoothing sunlight. No? So he says, you taste the pleasant sunrise just like our rivers. Our rivers means the rivers of the European continent. The rivers in England may be as Thames. No? You're just like one of our rivers. Our rivers, you make the plants, you apply dews on plants. You taste the pleasantness of the sunshine. You are very much common. You are just like our rivers. And then he goes on to say, you have green isles also. In your waters, there are green small islands. Green color, that means fertile. Small islands are there in your body of river. And also finally, like all the other common rivers in the world, finally, you happily hurries towards the sea. We know, to the Mediterranean Sea. You happily flows down to the Mediterranean Sea and join with the great ocean. That's what happens to you. That means you are very much common. Yes, you are the longest river in the world. Yes, you are huge. Yes, you have been able to fertile at least 7.7% of land area in Egypt. Yes, you house great crocodiles. You have all these marvels in you. That's just because you are a wanderer of nature. You are just a part of nature, just like other rivers. We know that in certain cultures, certain rivers are deified. For example, you can take the river Ganges in India. It is being deified by the Indian people. And just like river Mahavali, which springs from Shripada, the mountain Shripada in Sri Lanka, it also comes from the Moon Mountains. No? That means the Ruwenzori mountain range. So you are just common. You are a common thing. So by highlighting the commonness of the river Nile, the poet does not try to degrade the river Nile. The poet does not try to condemn the river Nile. What he says is, what he argues is, you are a part of nature. You are not something away from nature. You are in the framework of nature, and you are one of the fine examples of the marvel of nature. Nature is so wonderful. Nature has provided such gifts to the world, especially to the African continent. You are being gifted. So he stamps the naturality, the wonder of nature at the end of the poem. That's how the poem works. Okay, I hope my explanation would have helped you to understand this poem. I know that there are so many complaints about this poem. Students complain that it is not easy to understand, maybe because of its elevated language, or maybe because of this sonnet structure. But anyway, I'm sure that you have got something today. I have made it clear for you today. So the themes are, what do you think is the main theme Of course, nature. Nature is wonderful. Nature is divine. Nature is a gift. So that is the main theme of this poem. So children, we'll meet in another video clip. Till then, goodbye and stay safe.